Hey, my name's Andrew. Callum had asked me to sit down and speak about another of my bikes.
Yeah,
I've been here before and I've been on Moving Our World. Happy to be here again.
Sick. So can you tell us a little bit about where you came from? You know, I know that you came from Christchurch. Christchurch is globally known these days because they had massive ice quakes, earthquakes.
Yeah.
So people know of Christchurch. They've known about Christchurch because of the earthquakes and stuff like that. But you know, to you, it's not an earthquake city. It's where you came from.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about growing up there? What you kind of were exposed to? Your grandfather, the Steam Society, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm from. I say Christchurch, but more North Canterbury. It's about 20 minutes north of Christchurch, a small town called Kaiapoi. Grew up there, spent my teenage years there, and then moved to Auckland to study, and then ended up where I am now. But yeah, growing up in Canterbury was great. It's a flat city, very easy to get around, hence why small bikes are very popular there. But yeah, always been involved in mechanical or engineering type things growing up. Grandfather, father, all into motorbikes, cars.
Sadly, we lost your grandfather recently, so let's give him a bit of a shout out. Can you tell us a little bit about Don and his Barry ways?
Yeah. No, my grandfather Don, he passed away just recently last month.
Yeah.
Got to 84 years old, so pretty good. He was a grain and sheep farmer, small sheep, but wasn't really his thing. He actually wanted to sort of get out of that, and he did. He sold his farm and went into a more technical thing with Ashburton College, and then always involved with the Ashburton Planes sort of steam museum, and then the aviation museum after that. And he always had motorbikes, cars, camper vans, just anything mechanical or engineering or electrical. That was his thing.
So he's on your dad's side, and would you say that's kind of, it's definitely passed down?
Oh yeah, definitely passed down.
Yeah.
It was learnt recently that Granddad helped Dad get his job as a radio technician, which has evolved into what he's doing now with his current career. I thought that was really interesting, and yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Steam Society? Like you've told, so my exposure to the Steam is you talking about it a little bit, me ignoring that you talked about it, and then we went to Christchurch and we're just driving down the road and there's a traction engine.
Oh yeah,
just rolling down the main street.
Yep. And Granddad was heavily involved with the restoration of the Washington K88 locomotive.
Okay.
I actually remember a trip to Dunedin. I think it was the Dunedin train station's 100th anniversary, and they trained the train down, or on a truck, I think, and they did a run around Dunedin with all of these heritage locomotives.
Okay, sick. That's really awesome. So yeah, the automotive roots have been long established within the family.
Yeah.
When you grew up, was Dad ever hobbyizing on vehicles, or was he just like company cars and that's it?
No. I remember Dad always having, I don't remember when he got it. He didn't have it for that long. He had an Alfa Romeo Sprint, but it was very rusty, as Alfa Romeos are. Yeah. I remember that it was stored in the back of Mum's work, like in this little area. It was very strange. So I remember looking at that, and he was always working on it, tinkering it, but it just got too rusty. He had to get rid of it. Yeah. And then he's always had another project, had a Fiat from there, and I've always had an interest in older cars. Just sort of steam train from there. Yeah.
Where does the enjoyment start and stop, and the punishment start and stop, working on old machines?
The lines are pretty blurred there, but it keeps you busy, and I don't know, I've owned Japanese cars, and I still do, and they're much easier to work on, Japanese motorcycle, than British cars or Italian vehicles. But I wouldn't say there's no challenge, but you can easily spend a whole day trying to take the carbs off an Austin 1300 and tune them and put it back on, and that's satisfying when it does work. I don't know, I think it's just an enjoyment of the process of it, and learning the ways around the bad decisions they made in the design, or I don't know, it's just interesting.
Sweet.
And unique as well. Not everyone does it because it is punishing.
So you got the Austin first, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and we don't need to delve too much into that because we'll save that for Moving Our World one day when your car actually works properly. But I think it does now. Yeah. Well, I guess what I'm trying to get at is like when you went out to buy a car when you were 14, 13, was it like, hey, here's a car for $500? Or was it, hey, I want an Austin and there's an Austin for $500? You didn't give a shit what it was? Like,
Nah, there was some decision into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. A favourite movie of mine is a New Zealand movie. It's an old one from, I think it's the late 80s. It was Goodbye Pork Pie. And they had a yellow Mini in that movie. And Minis were too expensive, like they still are. They're ridiculous. Can't afford a Mini. So I ended up with the Austin. Because it looked kind of like a Mini and it's got the same engine. Yeah. And that was just literally my decision. I saw it on, before Facebook Marketplace, someone put it up on like Dirty South Car Club or something. So I bought this Austin for $500 when I was 14. Dad lent me some money for it. We went and picked it up, flat towed it home. And we got it going. I drove it around a bit. But it being a British car of that age and not really maintained, it did break down. So I needed something more reliable to get around, get to school, get into town because I lived out of town. So I ended up with the Yamaha. This same one, which is probably about 10 years I've had that now.
So this Yamaha's done a lot for you, decade of owning this thing.
Yep.
Looking back, when you did it, it was just what it was. You know, you went and rode with QCR back in 2015 or 16.
Right before that, maybe?
Yeah, 2014, 13. Yeah. Like, you rode with them a long time. Yeah, way before that. You're in Auckland then.
I was still at high school.
You're still at high school?
Yeah.
When you went to rode with them? Yeah, so can you give us a bit of a Quake City Rumblers kind of brief, like how you came in to know them and how that existed, and then...
No, QCR, I think that started from, it must have been on old school. Not way back in old school's history, but yeah, back in the day of old school. There was just a few Christchurch guys posting about their small machines they had, getting together for group rides and just hanging out basically. And they were looking, I wouldn't say they're looking for members or anything like that, but it was just whoever wants to come join can come ride. As long as you had the right attitude and the right type of bike, they didn't really care.
What's the right attitude for them?
Right attitude for them is, I guess, don't really give a shit about much. Yeah, just chop your bike. That I was often hassled about turning up for the first few rides with just a stock bike. They were like, when are you going to chop it? You know, let's get the grinder out, let's cut the guards off, let's cut the springs, let's put big tyres on it.
How old are you?
I'm 26, yeah.
No, but how old were you then?
Sorry. I would have been, I don't know, 16, 17.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you were like a small, timid little dude, like back then, with these big burly fellas.
Yeah. Well, they were adult. To me, like, well, I guess they are.
Yeah.
They're adults. And for some reason, they thought it was funny that this kid was coming along with them, and it was great. We had a really great time. And back then, pretty much everyone still had 50 or 80cc bikes, so it wasn't about going very fast. It was just about doing inappropriate things with the bikes or going inappropriate places. I do remember one ride we went around sort of Governor's Bay area. Half of it's gravel. Went down to this beach and had a barbecue, and they were drinking beers and trying to give me all these beers and things, and I was like, I'll just have a Pepsi. Still got to ride home back to Kaiapoi. They all lived in town, and I had to ride like 20 minutes sort of on the motorway back home after all this. Yeah.
Your bike fell apart on one of the rides?
Yeah, that happened. The swing arm bolt, the main one here, I realised that it started coming out when I went to change gears, and on the other side I was trying to change down, and the bolt was coming out, so the gear shifter was jamming on it, and I was like, hang on, that's not right. Put the brake on and the wheel goes like this, because it's not connected. And I'd lost a tail light that ride. Everything was vibrating loose, because you're going so fast down these poor hills. So yeah, I think the bike ended up on someone's ute that day.
I would say that's the glory days of Quake City Rumblers and QCR. They didn't find their viral fame with Motor Roush until quite a few years later and stuff like that. But you know, within New Zealand, they were fairly well known.
Yeah.
What was there any kind of feeling of like elitism or not elitism? That's the wrong word entirely. Was there any kind of feeling of like entire opposite of elitism? Was there any kind of like brotherhood feeling like you're a part of something when you're doing that?
Yeah. You could tell these guys were like already prior mates. They'd had interest in cars, and I think some of them might have gone to school together or something, I guess.
Yeah.
And yeah, definitely. Everyone was just, there was no one was being rude to each other, no shit talking. It was just all just banter and really just laughs. Everyone was really into it. Yeah. And it was pretty good.
How many rides did you do with them before you moved to Auckland?
I couldn't remember. A few, not many.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I did move to Auckland not long after that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this bike went up to Auckland eventually, but for the first wee while you had no transport at all, right?
I had that's right. I had borrowed a few cars because my Austin had broke down on the trip to Auckland, unsurprisingly. So I was catching the bus a lot or borrowing cars. Yeah, and
Making
this bike
pallet
was
furniture.
What's that?
Making pallet furniture.
Pallet furniture to get some money. Yeah, this bike I'd actually fully disassembled it before I left to go to Auckland. I think I had big plans to do it up as every small moped owner does, strip it all down. And then I had sort of lost interest in a little while when I was finishing high school, just for a small amount of time. And it was just sitting in boxes in Dad's shed. And he put it together for me. I'd stripped the frame, that's right. The frame was stripped and I was going to paint it like a really candy brown is what I really wanted. Yeah. And so the frame was stripped, so he rattle canned it blue for me, which actually looks pretty good. Yeah. And put the rest of it together and shipped it up to me on the back of a furniture truck. And then I rode it in Auckland for a few years.
You had wheels.
Yeah, you could get around.
Yeah.
So I rode everywhere on that bike in Auckland, mainly to get to uni, but then it's just something to do after uni, go for a ride or go on the distinguished gentlemen's rides or... I do remember doing the first couple of those just on my own because I didn't know anyone with small bikes. And there wasn't really that I knew a small bike scene in Auckland. No.
I mean, looking back now, that was kind of the days of the Vespa scene losing its traction.
Yeah, for sure.
Christian Liebnau, which, rest in peace, he just passed away, which is shocking. We're losing way too many people in the small bike world. I always felt like the Vespa scene was something like, if you didn't have a Vespa, you weren't invited. So
I was going to say 100% that, because I remember going on this distinguished gentleman's ride, one of them, and there was a couple of guys on Vespas there, which were pretty nice. Yeah. And they were talking to me. They said, "Oh yeah, this is it's a pretty cool small bike." And they were saying, "We remember, when we were going on big rallies, we'd take along a sacrificial Honda Cub and see who could jump it the furthest and then burn it." I mean, just because it was Japanese and it's not a Vespa or not a Lambretta. So they appreciated the bike that I had, but they said this is why we don't really ride them. Yeah. We're not really interested in them. Yeah. So they were never something we liked.
I met you through old school as well. I think I gave you my broken front guard.
Yeah.
And you and Thomas had known each other, and the first time you actually hung out together was driving down here.
I think so. We'd seen each other at old school car meets. I probably took my bike because it's just what you did. And he had his Commodore probably at that time. And I mean, I'd seen him, had said hello, talked to him online, but we'd never really had that small bike connection until he got his Suzuki FA50, and then realised that FA50s suck, so we got a Suzuki FR50. Yeah. So I think we just decided to hop in the car and come down to the Mount to go for a ride in summer with you.
2016.
Yep.
December 10th.
You were on a loaned black Vespa.
Silver.
Silver?
There was a black Vespa.
Oh, okay.
I had the silver one that the clutch didn't work. I had to push off at every intersection and then slam it into first. Yeah. That was really cool. So you've had this bike a long time, and it's still a part of your life now, but it's gone through long periods of unuse, misuse, disuse, all of those things.
Yep.
What's your ultimate goal with this bike? Like, why does it look the way it does now? Were you trying to achieve something, or you've this, to put it in context, is the most viewed article on movingourworld.com when smallbikestuff.com existed, which I got rid of now. That just links to Moving Our World. It's literally the most viewed, and it's just a whole bunch of Indonesians and Thai people and stuff like that, looking up V75 racing and all that kind of stuff. So, give us a bit of a background about this model, its kind of heritage and history, and why it exists the way it does for you.
Well, this bike is known under a few names all over the world, a few different engine sizes, styles, but Yamaha New Zealand bought them in the 70s and 80s as a V50 and some V75?
80s.
And 80s and 90s. Yeah. There's a few engine sizes, but V50 was definitely the most popular in New Zealand. But they would have seen as a cheap means of transport for maybe a student or just someone trying to get to work. And then they're just kind of forgotten about. And it didn't have the popularity as the Honda models, certainly not in New Zealand and not overseas. they're still a great bike, and some would argue the two-stroke is better for performance for the same size. I remember that's why I was quite keen to pick this one up, because both Granddad and Dad were telling me two-stroke is much more power for its size. 50cc carbon, 50cc Yamaha, while it might get to the same speed of 50 kilometers an hour, this will get there a bit faster and a bit louder, and it'll be great. But for modifying them in New Zealand, that's not really a thing. And modifying bikes in general isn't really a thing in New Zealand, especially small bikes.
It's bolt-on society.
Yeah, for modern stuff. But until recent, this is just something that you use to get to work, and just then when you got a car, you just left it in the shed or dumped it. Especially overseas in Southeast Asian countries, this model or this style of Yamaha, it's also called the Mate or the V75, or it's got a few other names. It's incredibly popular. There's just so many more sold, much bigger population, competing with the Suzukis and the Hondas. So there's much more of an interest in modifying them. So that's sort of what I'm trying to do with this one. I don't have a particular country or style that I'm trying to emulate or copy, but it's got parts from Malaysia. Malaysian pipe.
That's Malaysian basketball in
Singapore, yep. This one came from the rack and everything. I got that as a genuine Yamaha part. Someone had imported from somewhere. Can't remember. Tyres and wheels are from Thailand. So it's just sort of all the bits I can find, and not all of them are made for this. I had to modify the pipe, or someone modified it for me. The basket, I've just made this up myself. Yeah,
it works.
The engine is actually one that I found here locally. It's a 90cc. I don't know how they got to New Zealand. It could have been sold here new, but it could have also come from Australia, where they use them as Australian post bikes for a few years.
Okay, sick. We went on a trip together. I was always pesting about how cool it was in Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
Did you eventually realise that all of the stuff I was saying, and this is not to blow my own horn, but did you, is that what happened? Did you be like, oh shit, he's not talking shit, there is a massive scene over here, not just this, but just everything, and it's just entirely different. Did that change your attitude towards things, or was it what you expected?
I guess so. You'd always talked about small bikes in Southeast Asia, and I just kind of assumed that it was similar to here, where it was a very small group, and you had to kind of go looking for these small bike enthusiasts. It wasn't just something you saw. And I was like, oh, that's cool, but I can do that same thing here. In New Zealand, I don't have to travel. But then sort of looking into it more, and then going overseas with you, the bikes are everywhere. It's not a small community, it's just how people live. It's the same way as if we walk up to the road there, everyone's driving a car. Everyone over there is riding a bike. And of course people are going to modify them, because that's what they do. And they're all small bikes, so yeah, there's a massive community and scene around that. Parts available, just people doing crazy and wild stuff, racing them. Yeah, so for sure, it definitely opened my eyes to what is actually happening. Yeah.
How does it make you feel riding this thing? Like when it's running, man, and you're out there?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's great. It's very, very loud. It always has been quite loud. I never used to have the baffle and the exhaust.
Stock exhaust.
Yeah. This one's ridiculous. Yeah, it's great. I don't know. It's this as it's set up now. I wouldn't say it's the nicest to ride. The gear changes are very harsh. The clutch isn't very smooth. The auto clutch setup is needs tuning, I guess. Needs refining. The grips are old and worn out, so the throttle's a bit funny. The brakes are okay. Yeah, the lights sometimes work. I don't know. It runs, but it's mid restoration. It's not. It's mid fixing up. The swing arm, I made it fit. It's off a Honda Wave copy, I think. And I need to finish painting it. I need to find some new rear shocks. Need to sort out the lights.
I need to put the new lowering links in the front to then put
the wheel, which is up there. Yeah. So it's always a work in progress, this bike.
Yeah.
I don't know if it'll ever be finished, but I like to keep it riding.
Yeah.
That's the big thing. When I was trying to do this massive project to it, I'd pull it all apart and put it in boxes and then just forget about it.
Yeah. Well, you just lose interest if it's not running.
Yeah. When it's not running, you're like, oh, what's the point?
Yeah.
Well, you've got to have that motivation to want to work on it and fix it, and sometimes it's hard to find that motivation.
Yeah. Sick. Anything else you want to talk about with bikes?
Not really.
No, neither.
No.